Is this an anime? Most of you will say no since it's a Disney show and it wasn't made in Japan. But there's just one problem. That's not how people in Japan define anime. In Japan, anime just refers to any animated work. Obviously, this creates a big problem. If the Japanese definition is just anything that's animated, then what counts as anime and what doesn't? Well, that's the Japanese definition. Obviously, if you live outside of Japan, anime is more of a conventional term. Usually when someone is talking about anime, they're talking about a show made in Japan. But what if it's not a Japanese story? What if it's an American cartoon that's made in Japan? Or what if it's a Japanese story that's made in China? So the first issue we have to figure out is where do we start? Naturally, we have to start with the classics, namely shows like Dragon Ball, Naruto, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. For most of these shows, they are usually made as animated adaptations of manga, or Japanese comics. And while there's as many different kinds of anime as there are different genres, there's a few common characteristics, especially as compared to Western animation. The first thing you'll notice is a certain level of drama. Dragon Ball is full of fights. Naruto is almost synonymous with being edgy. And JoJo's characters are so over the top that almost everything they do is a meme. Other kinds of shows can be dramatic, but there's just a certain kind of drama in anime that makes new fans go, what the hell am I watching? As a matter of fact, my buddy Yatogami put it perfectly in this tweet right here. Usually, anime has a certain level of emotion and vulnerability that makes it feel more adult than something like a kid's cartoon, making it more dramatic than a lot of other shows. On a similar note, anime can also be defined by its wacky character designs and strange abilities. Dragon Ball basically invented this with the spiky-haired Super Saiyans, planet-destroying fights, and characters who have to shout the names of their crazy laser attacks. Of course, you also have the demon monster trope that's commonly associated with Naruto, where the main character is possessed by some kind of powerful creature and it gives them all kinds of new abilities and transformations. And then on the weirder side, you have something like stands in JoJo's. In JoJo's, the characters have psychic powers that are embodied in their stands, and they all have a bunch of complicated rules that come together to create the story's elaborate power system. Something that's clearly more intricate than your more typical superpowers. Finally, and this is just me talking personally here, another thing that usually separates anime from other forms of animation is that it's a bit looser. Science Saru, for example, is infamous for its rough approach to animation, and it's this style of animation that you can see to some extent in some of the most popular anime fights. So just to recap, what most people consider anime usually has these three things in common: drama, bizarre powers, and loose animation. But that brings up an important question. If this is what makes something anime, then does an anime have to be made in Japan? Before I answer that question, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. So like we said, there's three things anime all have in common, but most people would define anime as a show made in Japan. So for example, something like the new anime Solo Leveling. That's a show that's made by a Japanese studio in Japan. Except there's just one problem. The original story isn't Japanese. Solo Leveling was originally made in South Korea before it was turned into an anime. But it looks like an anime. It's got weird powers like an anime. And the first two episodes are definitely dramatic, so it feels like an anime too. So by most people's definition, this isn't an anime. But if I didn't tell you it's technically Korean, most people would probably call this an anime. Okay, so maybe that's a bad example. I mentioned Science Saru earlier, so let's use their newest show, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. It's a Japanese studio that has some of the most influential artists in the industry, so obviously it's an anime, right? Well, a lot of people would tell you no. See, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is a sequel to the original Canadian comic series, so the source material isn't Japanese. Okay, but that's made in Japan, so it must be an anime. Well, technically, but a lot of the animators over at Science Saru are from Europe, and Science Saru split the work between its studio in Japan and the people over in LA. It was a culmination of work from people all over the world. so to say it was made in Japan doesn't really tell the whole story. But when you look at Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, it has that Science Saru style of animation, it's very dramatic, and the characters get all kinds of weird powers. The series has a lot in common with popular anime, and it was made by a Japanese studio. So even though the source material is Canadian and a lot of the creators aren't even from Japan, most people would probably call this anime. Okay, so clearly we can recognize certain shows as anime even though they technically weren't made in Japan. But let's take this one step further. What if the show isn't even Japanese? For example, would you consider Teen Titans an anime? I mean, it's based on an American comic made by an American company. It's owned by Cartoon Network, an American company. So if it's American, then it's probably not anime. Except, calling it American is kinda cheating. It is an American IP, so it is technically American, but if you do some research or, look at the credits, you'll find out that the show was animated by Dongwoo Animation and Lotto Animation, both of which are Korean studios. Also, one of the series creators, Glenn Murakami, is a Japanese American, and the show's opening was done by Puffy Amiyumi, a Japanese band that did both English and Japanese versions. Plus, the show has all the characteristics of anime. It's one of the most dramatic shows from Cartoon Network that touches on a lot of mature themes. It's got crazy powers. And while not as loose as something like Science Saru, a lot of the expressions and fights look and feel like anime. So yeah, Teen Titans is technically an American show, but it has a lot of the same stuff anime does. So why not call it anime? And a lot of the same stuff can be said for Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's an American show, also animated by Korean studios, and also has the same kind of drama, powers, and animation style that can be seen in Teen Titans and popular anime. It's for these same reasons that a lot of people would call a show like Amphibia an anime.
Wait, do Marcy and I get cool anime powers too?
Yes, honey, you should all get cool anime powers.
Amphibia is one of my all-time favorite shows. It's owned by Disney, and yet there's a lot of times when I'm watching the show that I'm like, this show is pretty anime. I mean, the characters do have anime powers.
Cool anime powers.
And that's not something I came up with, by the way.
Powers.
So obviously, Amphibia and shows like it look and feel like anime, even though they are clearly not Japanese. But as we just proved, a show doesn't have to be Japanese for it to feel like anime. As long as it has the same stuff as something like Dragon Ball or Naruto, then it's going to feel like an anime. So on that note, what about video games? I know we've been talking about TV shows, but do video games count as anime? I mean, they are technically a kind of animation. They have stories just like animated shows. I mean, there's even a category of fighting games called anime fighters that fans of the genre place in its own category. By that logic, shouldn't anime extend to video games too? Look at something like Sonic the Hedgehog. It's made by Sega, a Japanese company. The newer generation of games are definitely dramatic. It's got all kinds of emotional scenes, especially when you get to characters like Shadow. Plus, Sonic even has a super form. If that's not a nod to Super Saiyans, then nothing is. If you took all that and made it into a TV show, which there are, but just ignore that for a second, take all that, put it into a show, and ask someone if it's an anime. Odds are a lot of people will probably call it anime. You know what else looks and feels a lot like anime? Tekken 8. As a matter of fact, Tekken is the whole reason I even made this video. I was playing the story mode and the whole time I was like, this is probably the most anime fighting game there is. Which is funny because it's not even an anime fighter. But trust me, it's basically an anime. First of all, it's got a cool opening where the song is about destiny and standing up for yourself. You could easily place that over any anime opening. Plus, they use the opening in the final fight of the story mode, which anyone will tell you that's in every classic anime fight. It's a story about characters with bad dads. That's definitely anime. Let's see, what else? Over-the-top story with edgy characters and themes of destiny, war, and what it means to be family. Sounds pretty dramatic. Characters that can literally turn into devils. Sounds a lot like the characters from Naruto. And loose animation? Well, it's a 3D game, so it's kinda hard to have loose animation like a cartoon. But the characters all have spiky hair and crazy outfits, just like the characters in your favorite anime. I don't know, man. Kinda hard to say that Tekken isn't an anime. So clearly a video game can be anime just like a TV show can be an anime. On that note, let's go back to our original question. What counts as anime and what doesn't? The Japanese definition is anything that's animated, and the rest of the world usually means some kind of show made in Japan. But the problem with that definition is that it discounts all of the unique qualities of anime. All of the shows from Japan that people know as anime have a kind of drama, wackiness, and animation style that give them a certain vibe that when you see them, you know they're anime. Except, sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes it looks and feels like an anime, but it's made in China or Korea. Or it's made in Japan, but it's a video game instead of a movie. The reason for this is that anime is more than the small niche of TV shows that were made 20 or 30 years ago. Today, what people consider anime comes down to a vibe that they get from certain kinds of stories. It's the same way someone sees something hardcore and calls it metal. It could have nothing to do with music at all and still be metal. In this sense, it's only logical that anime also be considered a genre rather than this one really specific category of shows. That's why anything can be anime as long as it fits into that same genre of shows as series like Naruto or My Hero Academia or Attack on Titan. The definition of anime has changed from what it used to be in the days of Dragon Ball and Fist of the North Star, and it will only continue to change as anime becomes more mainstream and all-encompassing. Anime isn't just this small niche of shows that are only made in Japan. It's a story genre that's slowly becoming a staple alongside some of the oldest kinds of stories. A genre that can be defined by dramatic stories, crazy powers, and a visual style full of personality. And that is what makes something anime. But now I'd like to hear what you think. What shows would you consider anime? What other mediums could be anime? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then make sure to check out my recent video on the relationship between bad manga and their anime. In that video, I talk about how bad manga can actually ruin their anime adaptations. You can find it in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.